Imagine being trapped in a frozen wasteland where temperatures plummet to -40 degrees, daylight vanishes for months, and your only companions are the ghosts of those who didn't make it. In 1897, the steam whaler Belgica became locked in Antarctic ice during the first expedition to spend winter below the Antarctic Circle. As the sun disappeared and darkness consumed everything, the crew began to unravel. Madness, starvation, and despair would test the limits of human endurance in one of the most harrowing polar survival stories ever recorded. The Belgica was a Norwegian sealer converted into a research vessel, measuring 118 feet in length with a reinforced hull designed to withstand ice pressure. Built in 1884, she was sturdy but far from luxurious. Her quarters were cramped, ventilation was poor, and heating was minimal. In 1896, Belgian naval officer Adrien de Gerlache purchased the vessel with a bold vision, to lead the first scientific expedition to Antarctica. De Gerlache was driven by ambition and national pride. Belgium had never mounted a major polar expedition, and he was determined to change that. By August 1897, the Belgica departed Antwerp with a crew of 19 men representing 6 nationalities: Belgians, Norwegians, Poles, Romanians, and Americans. Among them was Roald Amundsen, a young Norwegian who would later become the first person to reach the South Pole. The ship's doctor was an American named Frederick Cook, who brought with him medical supplies and a camera to document their journey. The crew also included scientists eager to study the uncharted continent's geology, wildlife, and magnetic fields. They sailed south through the Atlantic, stopping briefly in Rio de Janeiro and Montevideo before crossing into the frigid waters of the Drake Passage. By January 1898, the Belgica reached the edge of the Antarctic pack ice. De Gerlache pushed forward, navigating through narrow channels between towering icebergs. The crew marveled at the alien landscape: glaciers that glowed blue in the pale sunlight, colonies of penguins numbering in the thousands, and seals lounging on ice floes. It was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. On January 23, 1898, they made landfall on the Antarctic Peninsula near what would later be called the Gerlache Strait. They explored rocky islands, collected specimens, and took depth soundings of the frigid waters. The scientists were thrilled. But as February arrived, the southern hemisphere summer began to fade. De Gerlache faced a critical decision: turn back now and return to civilization, or push deeper south in search of greater discoveries. Against the advice of his more experienced officers, particularly Amundsen, de Gerlache chose to continue. He believed they could navigate through the pack ice and escape before winter set in. It was a gamble that would cost them dearly. By late February, the ice began to thicken around the ship. The narrow channels they had sailed through were closing. Each day, the Belgica's progress slowed. On March 2, 1898, the ice finally won. The ship became completely trapped at 71 degrees south latitude, deep within the Antarctic pack ice. At first, the crew remained optimistic. They assumed the ice would break up within weeks, allowing them to escape. But as March turned to April and April into May, that hope faded. The sun dipped lower on the horizon each day until, on May 15, it disappeared entirely. Polar night had begun. For the next 70 days, the crew would live in total darkness. The only light came from oil lamps and the faint glow of the aurora australis dancing across the black sky. The psychological toll was immediate and devastating. Men who had been energetic and cheerful became withdrawn and irritable. Arguments erupted over trivial matters. Some crew members stopped speaking altogether, retreating into themselves. The Belgian captain, Georges Lecointe, suffered a mental breakdown and had to be confined to his cabin. Another crew member, a Norwegian sailor named Adam Tollefsen, descended into paranoia, convinced that the crew was plotting to kill him. Dr. Cook recognized the signs of what would later be called polar madness, a psychological condition caused by isolation, darkness, and monotony. He prescribed fresh seal meat, believing that scurvy and malnutrition were worsening their mental states. But many of the men refused to eat it, finding the taste repulsive. They clung to their dwindling supplies of canned goods and biscuits, even as their bodies weakened. The cold was relentless. Inside the ship, temperatures often dropped below freezing. Condensation from their breath formed ice on the walls and ceiling. Water froze in their cups. Their clothing, perpetually damp, never fully dried. Frostbite was a constant threat. Several men lost toes. One sailor developed gangrene in his hand and had to have 2 fingers amputated by Dr. Cook using primitive surgical tools and no anesthesia except alcohol. Food became an obsession. The men talked endlessly about the meals they would eat when they returned home. They described in excruciating detail the taste of fresh bread, roasted chicken, and warm soup. But in reality, their diet consisted of seal meat, penguin, and whatever provisions remained from their voyage south. Scurvy began to spread despite Cook's efforts. Their gums swelled and bled. Their teeth loosened. Old wounds reopened. As winter dragged on, death seemed inevitable. De Gerlache himself grew weak and despondent, spending days in his cabin unable to muster the will to lead. It was Roald Amundsen who kept the crew alive through sheer determination. He forced the men to exercise on the ice, even in the bitter cold. He organized work parties to clear snow from the deck and repair equipment. He led by example, refusing to surrender to despair. Frederick Cook also proved invaluable. He documented their suffering with his camera, capturing haunting images of gaunt, hollow-eyed men standing on the ice. He treated their ailments as best he could and maintained meticulous medical records. He also convinced the crew to build a makeshift oven on the ice and bake fresh bread, a small act that lifted their spirits more than any medicine could. In August, the sun finally returned. Its appearance on the horizon after 70 days of darkness brought tears to the eyes of hardened sailors. But their ordeal was far from over. The ice showed no signs of breaking up. The ship remained trapped, drifting slowly with the pack ice toward the open ocean. If the ice didn't release them soon, they would drift past the edge of the continent and be lost forever in the Southern Ocean. By November, desperation set in. Amundsen proposed a radical plan: they would cut a channel through the ice to open water. It seemed impossible. The ice was over 6 feet thick in places. But they had no other choice. Using saws, picks, and explosives, the crew began the grueling work. Day after day, they hacked away at the frozen barrier, their hands blistered and bleeding, their bodies exhausted. Progress was agonizingly slow. For every foot they gained, the ice would refreeze overnight, undoing their efforts. But they refused to quit. On February 14, 1899, after weeks of backbreaking labor, a storm arrived. The winds howled, and the ice cracked and shifted. The channel they had carved widened. On March 14, 1899, after 13 months trapped in the ice, the Belgica finally broke free. The crew erupted in celebration, but their relief was tempered by exhaustion and trauma. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. Every man aboard had lost weight. Many suffered permanent physical damage from frostbite and scurvy. Psychologically, they would carry the scars for the rest of their lives. The Belgica limped northward, reaching Punta Arenas, Chile, on March 28, 1899. News of their survival spread quickly. They were hailed as heroes, men who had endured the unendurable. But the crew knew the truth: they had been pushed to the brink of madness and death, saved only by luck, stubborn will, and the leadership of a few determined individuals. The expedition had achieved its scientific goals, collecting valuable data on Antarctic weather, magnetism, and marine life. But the human cost was undeniable. The men who returned were not the same ones who had departed. They had seen the darkest depths of human endurance and survived to tell the tale. The story of the Belgica became legendary in the annals of polar exploration. It proved that humans could survive an Antarctic winter, but it also revealed the psychological horrors of isolation and darkness. The lessons learned aboard the Belgica would shape future expeditions, leading to better preparation, improved nutrition, and a greater understanding of the mental challenges faced by those who venture into the world's most hostile environments. Roald Amundsen would go on to lead his own successful expeditions, always remembering the lessons of the Belgica. Frederick Cook continued his career as an explorer, though his later claims of reaching the North Pole would be mired in controversy. Adrien de Gerlache returned to Belgium a broken man, haunted by the decisions he had made and the suffering he had caused. The Belgica herself met a quiet end. She was sold and eventually wrecked off the coast of Greenland in 1940. But her legacy endures as a testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. The men who survived the Antarctic night aboard the Belgica proved that even in the darkest, coldest, and most hopeless circumstances, the human spirit can endure. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible true story of survival and courage.